Good to have you here. This is Omni View, episode 119, Balanced News Perspectives. Today is July 21st, 2026. Today's stories from around the world, multiple viewpoints, your call. U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods and a major rescue in India show how trade policy and industrial accidents reshape daily costs and safety for millions. U.S. President Donald Trump stated he will impose tariffs of 50% on a range of Canadian imports. The announcement came on July 21st and targets goods moving across the border. The statement was issued through official channels and immediately drew responses from Canadian trade officials monitoring cross-border flows. The move follows long-standing U.S. concerns over trade balances and specific sectors such as steel and autos. Canadian officials have historically responded to similar threats by preparing retaliatory lists and seeking talks through existing trade agreements. Reuters and BBC reports both record the statement as a formal policy signal rather than a completed legal step, noting that actual implementation requires further administrative action. The shared fact is the public announcement itself. The split lies in whether the tariffs are viewed primarily as leverage for negotiations or as a durable change in market access. BBC reporting emphasizes the direct effect on household goods and energy-related imports, while Reuters places the decision within broader North American supply chain adjustments already underway. Administration officials argue that the 50% rate will protect domestic manufacturing jobs by raising the cost of Canadian steel and automotive parts enough to shift orders to U.S. plants, citing past instances where similar duties led to new factory investments. They acknowledge that some small exporters may face short-term losses, but maintain the overall employment gain outweighs those effects. Canadian government representatives and U.S. import-dependent manufacturers contend that the tariffs will raise input costs for American assembly lines that rely on Canadian components, pointing to integrated auto production data showing thousands of cross-border shipments daily. They concede that targeted subsidies could offset some damage, but warn that broad retaliation from Ottawa would hit U.S. agricultural exports. Canadian trade representatives are expected to begin consultations with U.S. counterparts within days, while preparing domestic support measures for affected exporters. Shifting now to a developing story in India. A blast inside a hydroelectric tunnel in India killed at least 10 workers and left more than 15 others trapped. Rescue teams are working to reach those still inside. The incident occurred at a remote mountain construction site where crews were extending a water channel for power generation. Reuters reports focus on the immediate engineering challenges of reaching the trapped workers in a remote mountain site. Local authorities have mobilized additional equipment while families wait at the surface. The undisputed facts are the death toll and the number unaccounted for. Coverage differs on how quickly full extraction can be completed given the tunnel's depth and condition. Indian state agencies have deployed specialized drilling rigs and medical teams to the location, with updates issued every few hours on oxygen levels and structural stability inside the damaged section. Officials will release updated casualty figures and a timeline for completing the rescue once daylight operations resume. Meanwhile, China's state-backed technology initiatives face new pressures. Reuters' Breaking Views examined the difficulties facing China's government-supported technology initiatives amid tightening global export controls and domestic capital constraints. State investment vehicles continue to allocate funds to selected semiconductor and software programs despite reduced access to certain foreign tools. The analysis highlights that state funds continue to back selected chip and software projects even as private investors pull back. International observers note that these efforts must now achieve results with less access to advanced foreign equipment. The factual baseline is continued state investment. Interpretations differ on whether the approach can close technology gaps before further restrictions take effect. Reuters notes that production yield improvements remain modest in several pilot facilities, while domestic policy documents emphasize long-term self-reliance targets set for 2030. Industry analysts will track whether the next round of state funding announcements produces measurable gains in domestic chip production yields. Next, seasonal contrasts appear across regions. The ski resort in Lesotho has begun its winter season, while parts of the United States and Europe experience summer heat waves. The facility operates at high elevation in the Maludi Mountains and draws visitors from neighboring countries during the Southern Hemisphere winter months. AP coverage notes that the small southern African nation maintains a ski industry at high elevation even as global temperatures rise. Tourism operators in Lesotho present the season as a reliable draw for regional visitors. The shared observation is the contrast in seasonal conditions. The difference lies in whether the resort's continued operation is seen as an economic asset or an outlier explained by altitude. Local operators report steady bookings from South African and regional travelers seeking cooler temperatures. Resort operators will report visitor numbers and revenue figures once the peak holiday period ends. Turning to the economy, Indian steel producers are increasing sales inside India after European import restrictions and lower-priced Chinese output reduced overseas margins. Companies have redirected rolling mill capacity toward construction beams and infrastructure-grade plate for local projects. Reuters reports that companies are redirecting capacity toward local construction and infrastructure projects. Government data show rising domestic demand from ongoing building programs. The undisputed trend is the change in export volumes. The remaining question is how long domestic demand can absorb the redirected supply without price pressure. Major producers, including Tata Steel and JSW Steel, have publicly adjusted shipment schedules to prioritize Indian buyers. Quarterly earnings releases from major Indian steel firms will show whether domestic sales have offset the drop in exports. The International Monetary Fund listed higher oil prices and a weaker monsoon as the main threats to India's economic expansion in the coming fiscal year. The forecast adjustment applies to the period beginning April 2026 and incorporates current rainfall shortfalls in key agricultural states. The fund's assessment uses current commodity prices and rainfall data to adjust its growth forecast. Indian officials have pointed to diversification of energy sources as a buffer. The baseline projection is lower growth than previously expected. The divergence centers on how quickly alternative energy supplies can reduce oil dependence. The IMF statement also references the potential for higher fertilizer and transport costs if crude remains elevated. The next monsoon progress report and crude oil price movements will be compared against the IMF assumptions. Now, some progress worth knowing about. The new UK Chancellor, John Healey, confirmed that value-added tax will be removed from domestic electricity bills starting October 1st. The change applies to standard residential tariffs and will be processed automatically by suppliers through existing billing systems. The measure is intended to lower energy costs for households. Government statements note that the change will apply automatically through billing systems. The main uncertainty is the size of the fiscal impact once the full-year cost is calculated. Treasury estimates will be published alongside the autumn budget update. Energy suppliers will update customer bills from October, and the Treasury will publish the estimated annual cost to public finances. Now, to really understand this story, there's something most coverage leaves out. Most coverage treats a presidential tariff statement as an immediate change in border taxes. Yet the step from announcement to enforcement involves several distinct legal and administrative stages. The president can invoke existing statutes such as Section 232 or Section 301, but each requires formal notices, public comment periods, and coordination with the Commerce Department and U.S. Trade Representative before duties are collected at ports. Historical examples show that some announced tariffs were later scaled back after negotiations or legal challenges, while others took months to reach full effect. Knowing this sequence helps readers distinguish between a political signal meant to prompt talks and a measure that has already cleared the regulatory process. When the next tariff announcement appears, check whether the White House has published the required Federal Register notice and identified the precise statutory authority being used. Readers can also review the U.S. International Trade Commission's docket to see whether any affected industries have filed comments that could alter the final scope of the duties. If you want to go deeper on the tariffs, compare how BBC and Reuters are covering trade policy shifts. Tomorrow, watch for updates on rescue timelines from the India tunnel site and the first Canadian statements on possible retaliation measures. That's Omni View. The news can feel heavy, but understanding what's actually happening and what's being done about it beats doom scrolling every time. Stay curious. Pick one story from today and read it from a second outlet you don't usually open. If balanced perspectives are valuable to you, share this with a friend and subscribe wherever you listen. See you tomorrow. And if you'd rather watch than listen, find us on YouTube at NARA Network. Links in the show notes. This show comes to you from the NARA Network. If you want another sharp daily briefing, Environmental Intelligence has you covered. The Environment and Climate Policy Brief for Canada. All our shows are free at naranetwork.com. New to the network? naranetwork.com/start-here picks the right daily briefing for you in about 2 minutes. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.